What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me here on episode 8 of the 90 Feet From Home Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Joe Orico. You guys can find me over on Twitter at Joe Orico99, doing a lot of stuff over there, posting my notes every night, also sharing out any of the work I do over at Fantasy Pros. You guys can check it out over there. But we are doing a very special show today. You guys know I'm a Toronto native. I'm a Blue Jays homer. So this one is very fun for me, getting to chat with a couple of the best in the business. Sho Alli and Blake Murphy are here from the Fan 590 and Sportsnet. Guys, it's really great to talk with you. Sho, we've talked before. Blake, this is the first time, but it's awesome. God, I hear you guys in my ears every single day on my commutes on the ever-shrinking Gardner Expressway. So it's awesome to have you guys here today.
Yeah, glad to be here, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Love the fantasy work. Indispensable at the start of the season, especially. So appreciate you as well.
Yeah, Joe, I managed to, thanks to your quick hits, get basically a lot of the guys over my league mates, which they hate. So thank you for Garrett Crochet and Luis Heel. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Crochet is a nice get. This is Blue Jays adjacent, I promise. But an insane fantasy thing is I play in a league where relief appearances and holds are both like on the radar. And Adam Simber lately for the Angels has just been like racking up hold after hold, even though like somehow his ERA on the season is only like 3.60, but he has like 5 holds in the last week with like an 8 ERA. It is the most, I guess it's a very Angels-y stat line going on, but just a ridiculous Adam Simber resurgence right now.
Saves and holds leagues are crazy. That's my Tout Wars league is saves and holds, and it's
nice.
It's an interesting game because there's the typical closers are kind of devalued, and you have guys like Adam Simber who just kind of are almost as valuable. Now, for those of you who are thinking, what are you bringing these guys on to talk about fantasy for? What do these guys know about fantasy? A couple of Toronto radio guys. Well, Sho Alli has hosted. I'm not sure if it's currently on right now, but he's hosted a fantasy show over at Sportsnet. And Blake Murphy, you guys probably know the Sleeper in the Bus podcast. I'm guessing a lot of people who are listening to the show are familiar with Paul Sporer, Justin Mason, Jason Collette, etc. It may interest you to know that Blake was the first ever Canadian guest, and he appeared on, I believe, episode 4 or 5 of the Sleeper in the Bus. So this is somebody who has both of these guys have a lot of experience in the fantasy world. Blake, I was just going through the feed yesterday because I remembered like you did 1 or 2 of those, but I was like, wow, Blake was the first ever Canadian on Sleeper in the Bus, and that was a long, long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time. So that would have been, I guess, 2013-ish. But yeah, wow. It's interesting. Like my career, like I started as like a baseball and basketball guy and a little bit of hockey. Like I was more like analytics focused than any sport specifically. And then, yeah, the way my career shook out was kind of kept nudging me toward basketball. But like as recently as like 2016, I was still doing like rotographs, daily morning write-ups and stuff like that. And I still like, I don't really play fantasy basketball anymore, and fantasy hockey, I only really do like a playoff pool, but I still have like several big money fantasy baseball teams. I'm locked in with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, once it gets into you, it's hard to get it out of you for sure. The roto really gets into the blood there. We are here to talk some Blue Jays. We might mix in some fantasy talk, but this is going to be more so just looking at the Jays team as a whole. It's been an interesting season, to say the least. Sho, let's start with you here. What are your thoughts on what we've seen as a whole now through, I guess, about a third of the season at this point?
Boy, it's hard to fault any fans for feeling frustrated. I'll say that. I mean, when we do Jays talk and you get the calls and texts, and it's funny because I find every win you get like the feeling is maybe this is the one that turns it around. Maybe this is the one that turns it around, and then every loss is a referendum on the team. Like it's okay, this guy needs to go, that guy needs to go, Ross Atkins needs to go, John, you know what I mean? Like it's that seems to be the conversation. Maybe it's because, especially when you compare it to other sports in the city, and the Raptors are where they are right now. They did win a championship. The Leafs have high expectations, new head coach, but I find maybe it's just because you just play more baseball games than you do basketball or hockey, but I find I see it more in the reaction to Blue Jays games, but it is, I find it difficult to fault anyone for feeling frustrated because as the popular refrain these days is it's not, game 45 of these results. It's game 200 plus, which I kind of disagree with sometimes and kind of agree with, but the results have often been the same. So it's hard to really get too mad at anyone when they are venting on Jays talk.
Yeah, there's twice as many games as you see in the NHL or the NBA. There's not that cool down period after a loss. You get the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever. Every single day, if you lose, you got to come back out to the ballpark. And I know you guys are taking a lot of the brunt there on those phone lines. Blake, what are your thoughts on what we've seen so far through about 50 games here?
Yeah, it's tough, man. And on the one hand, like, it's always nice to be right. I don't think any of us wanted to be this right about, heading into the season. I don't know that any of us previewing this team thought they had done enough in the offseason, certainly on the offensive side. I had them in the wild card mix in the American League, where obviously it's going to be very, very tight. They could still get back there. And the idea was kind of like, well, they still have a really good rotation. There's some bullpen depth there, and they'll probably cobble together like an average-ish offense. And all of those things have been a little worse than you thought. The overall takeaway that, yeah, they didn't do enough in the offseason is still there. They certainly didn't do enough on the offensive side. We can convincingly say that now, but I don't think any of us thought it would be this bad and this like holistic up and down the lineup. And certainly, on the bullpen side, this, every bullpen is volatile. I don't think anyone really saw the Jays having like the number 28 bullpen ERA either, given the names in there and some of the track records. So, yeah, it's okay to be like a little bit of, especially for those people who, thought there should have been a front office change at the end of last season, to be like, yeah, see, you didn't do enough in the offseason. You didn't do enough on the offensive end. But no one can claim that they thought this team was going to outscore only the White Sox. It's been pretty remarkable on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of the bat speed data yet because it's still so brand new, and you probably need a couple of years worth of data. But Toronto does not exactly pop in the bat speed metrics. There's just not a lot that Toronto's really exceeding in to this point of the season. But it has been a bit of a positive couple of weeks here, especially for Vladimir Guerrero. And it's more than just a couple of weeks at this point. It's like a month plus where he's been really good. Bo Bichette, everybody was kind of dancing on his grave a couple of weeks ago. At least on fantasy Twitter, they were. Look at Bo Bichette. He's busted. He's cooked. He's 26 years old. I mean, he's turning it around. I think these guys are going to be all right. But it's kind of interesting because Mark Feinsand the other day had a report that Toronto may end up shopping this young duo, which is kind of startling for a lot of us in the city to hear. Maybe it makes sense, though. I'm curious what you guys think on, the future of Bo and Vlad and if it will be in a Blue Jays uniform. Blake, let's throw back to you here. What are your thoughts on the duo here and their future?
Yeah, I don't think it's, I get where Mark's coming from. Like, of course, the Jays are struggling. You're gonna touch base around the league and see, just how predatory other teams are being. And I think that was the spirit of his report was that, other teams are going to circle. They're going to vulture a little bit if they think you're going to tank. The big difference here is, I could see things having gone bad enough for the Blue Jays that they sell off some pieces with an eye toward being better in 2025. But given what they just poured into the stadium renovations, the new suites they have to fill, things like that, the fact that Vlad and Bo do still have one more year of control and are a little younger, it's hard for me to see a scenario where they would blow the whole thing up with an eye toward like 2026, 2027, that kind of thing, unless they got blown away in an offer. And Feinsand's report says, they asked for the moon. I think when we factor in where the Jays are timeline wise and the fact that Vlad and Bo have a year and a half of control left versus being pending free agents, like the Jays are probably asking for the Juan Soto package, even though neither of those guys are Juan Soto. They have a little bit of extra control. And yeah, the Jays are not going to move off those guys willingly. So I think things would have to get a lot worse somehow before we start really talking about that. I just think, over after a couple of off seasons where a big part of the discussion was the lack of discussion around long-term extensions, this does just hammer home that, like, yeah, the window right now with this group kind of is to 2025, not indefinite.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to stomach because if they do trade either of them or both of them, that is kind of the signal that it's a full-blown rebuild at that point. Those two are the kind of the driving force here. Sho, what do you think? Are we going to see these guys sign extensions? Is there a chance they get traded? Where's your head at right now on Bo and Vlad?
I would be surprised if either of them got traded prior to them becoming free agents, but I wouldn't be surprised if, and this is like a conversation we can rehab in a year and a bit, but if, let's say, we get to free agency and they both don't have extensions, I think I'd be more surprised if Vladdy walked than Bo. Just because maybe it's because of their positions and partially because of their nature. But, first basemen probably are just generally not going to get as much money as okay defensively, pretty good offensively shortstops. So I kind of think that Bo probably is not a Blue Jay long term, but I would be surprised if Vladdy didn't sign a long-term extension, whether that's in the next couple of years or when he's a free agent. And the other half of that is, of course, how much money is that going to be? Because I don't really think people are going to be that upset if Vladdy signs a long-term extension for what is considered like, reasonable money. But if he's signing, for $40 million a year or whatever it is, people are probably not going to love it. But then again, has he shown he is that player if you take out 2021? Probably not. But I think Vladdy is the one if I had to pick one, he's the guy who I would probably say is here long term. I wouldn't be surprised, though, because I do agree with what Blake said about they're not going to tear it down because of what that signals. But I wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, they come out of the stretch against, going all the way to the Pirates series at the Rogers Center, and then they take on the Orioles for 4. And then the month of June is not exactly easy. I can see, mid-June, if things haven't improved to a great deal, I could see maybe them having conversations about trading guys like Jimmy Garcia or Yusei Kikuchi, guys who are free agents after this season, because maybe you maximize the return for that. But I would be surprised if Bo or Vladdy went.
Absolutely. I think I agree with you that if I had to bet on one of them being a Blue Jay long-term, it's probably Vlad. I don't know if that's because he's a little more outspoken about not liking the Yankees or the fact that he's born in Canada or whatever it is. Bo is more quiet. And I'm not really sure what Bo's head is saying long-term. I'd like to see them both here, obviously. The thing that really is interesting to me with Vladdy is the 2021 season, and I've kind of done this myself of just falling into he was only good because of the minor league park argument. If you go and look back at StatCast and look at those balls that he was hitting, they were leaving the Polo Grounds. It didn't matter where he was playing. So it's kind of curious, like, as the league just adjusted to him and he hasn't properly been able to adjust back, although it does seem at times like he is fully locked in like he has recently. I wonder what we're going to see from Vlad going forward. Is he ever going to be able to hit the heights that he hit in 2021 again? I would imagine it's possible, but is it likely at this point, you think, Sho?
I think it's unlikely he gets to be a 48 home run hitter, but if he's hitting for slightly more power than he is right now, because I want to say over his last 20 games, he's hitting well over 350 or something like that. Like he's playing very, very well. So he's not going to be like a 400 hitter his whole career, but if he can just if that normalizes with a little bit more power and maybe, and again, I think a lot has been made of the hitting coaches and like Don Mattingly and Guillermo Martinez. Probably more is made of them than the players actually going and hitting the ball themselves. If things do normalize a little bit, I do wonder if he becomes more of a contact hitter, and he is very good, but you want to see more power. He's only hit 1 home run in however many games. I want to say it was the Grand Slam in Washington. It was the last time we saw him hit a home run. So you want to see more power from him, but I would be, while I would be surprised if he regained 2021's form, I think you can expect something closer at the very least what we've been getting the last 2.5 weeks.
Blake, you think we see a 40 homer season from Vlad again?
Not the way things have been trending, no. And look, the two most important things you can do, right? Like if we control everything else and all else is equal, the two most important things you can do as a hitter are swing at good pitches and hit the ball really hard. And Vlad always hits the ball really hard. This hot month or so here has been in large part because he's getting back to swinging at good pitches. He has the component skills you need, but exit velocity isn't everything, right? And we know that we need to know what direction you're hitting it in, how high you're hitting it. You can have a 50% fly ball rate and 105 average exit velocity, but all your fly balls are 90 miles an hour and your 50% ground balls are 120 miles an hour, right? We need to know more there. So there's an interesting stat from Robert Orr at Baseball Prospectus. So he has damage rate, and that takes each individual batted ball, and it says, okay, with this exit velocity, this launch angle hit to this part of the park, what would we expect the result to be? And this is trying to take into account, some of the pushback fans will give of, oh, he doesn't hit the ball that hard in the air, or, oh, that's just ground balls or whatever. We can control for that and take a look. And his damage rate over the last 4 years has been on a steady decline. Now it's come back up a little bit lately, again, because he's just playing so well. And when you hit the ball that hard, you can have a 350 batting average if you hit ground balls 115 miles an hour every time. But there is this trend of it's not just a gap between what's actually happening and the expected results. There is something with how Vlad is hitting the ball, the way in which he generates these big exit velocities that is hampering his production a little bit. So I don't know that he gets back to the 40 home run guy. The scouting book on him coming up was he was probably a guy who would flirt with hitting 300 and hit 25, 30 bombs. maybe that's the version of him we need to recalibrate for. It's that 2022 season where he hit 30, 35 home runs. Maybe you hope for a little bit better average on top of that. I think he hit 275 that year. So that's part of it as well. There's also an unknown component with all this batted ball stuff. There's still one thing we don't have that I'm really curious about, and this is like the Jose Bautista example in my brain. Is Jose Bautista talked about how one of the things that helped him unlock his power stroke was the way he was putting spin on the ball off the bat. And that's something that we still don't know. We still don't have data on. I wonder if once we get to that point, if we find out there's some sort of thing with the way that Vlad connects with the ball, whether it's the timing of the swing or like we see with the new bat speed data, he has a low square up percentage. So maybe he's just like catching the ball at a certain part where that spin on the ball coming off the bat just isn't producing the results that we'd expect from the exit velocities. I don't know. It's a bit of a head scratcher, but I think I've recalibrated at this point that like if Vlad hits high 280s and hits 30 home runs, that's now a good Vlad season, not 48 home runs and 120 RBI.
I think everybody in Toronto would sign up if you told them you're getting the next 10 years of Vladdy is going to be 280 every year with 30 homers. I think everybody's going to be pretty on board with that. Let's talk about Davis Schneider, though. Let's switch gears here and talk about the Babe. This guy is like shocking to me how great he has been to this point in his major league career. A 153 WRC plus. I know we're still talking about, 76 games at this point, but he's walking at an incredible rate at 13%. The OPS is over 900. I don't know that anybody expects it to be sustainable, but I mean, he keeps doing it. I know it's only half a season worth of games at this point, but Sho, is this something that we can expect him to settle into as like an above average player? Is Davis Schneider going to be an all-star? What are your expectations? Because he's a very tricky player to evaluate. A lot of the people I talk to say he's going to come back down. He's going to come back down. And even if we're talking fantasy, he's like 25% rostered in Yahoo fantasy leagues because I don't think people really buy into it. But what's not to buy into at this point based on what we've seen?
Well, I do like that the Blue Jays have been giving him more opportunity in the last little while. I mean, we went from last year after his crazy beginning in Boston, and then he tapered off, right? It cooled off towards the end of the season. And going into this season, I kind of thought to myself, if Davis Schneider settles into being anything close to an everyday player, I'd feel like that's a success, basically, right? And so credit to Davis Schneider for being able to remake himself to a point where now he is the leadoff hitter for this team. He might have been, when Springer was struggling, I thought to myself, there probably isn't another guy on the team. I would feel that maybe it was Bo, but Bo was also hitting pretty poorly at the time. So was there another guy I'd feel that good about hitting leadoff for an extended period if Springer continues to struggle? And Davis Schneider is that guy. You mentioned all-star. I would be surprised if he ever becomes maybe the absolute peak is all-star, but if he ever becomes, even if he settles just below, what did you say, a 152 WRC plus, if he's below that, then that's still not terrible for a guy that only made his debut last year. I am curious to see what he looks like once things maybe adjust back to him, because of course coming into this year, we know, and he has oddly said it himself a lot about how he struggles with the high heat and the high fastball, and he does still occasionally, but he's managed to work on that to a point where I wonder if he is, as long as he's getting more reps, even if he's not the everyday second baseman and everyday player, then that's someone you can rely on. I don't know if he'll be the leadoff hitter for the rest of the season, but at the very least for now, until let's say the All-Star break, I'd like to see him stick there just to see what he's got, because you want to know if he will cool off at one point here.
He really seems like such an intelligent player, even just where he picks his spots to steal bases. We saw one yesterday, and there's like when his first and third situations, it's been a couple times where he's picked a spot and he doesn't even get a throw down. And maybe it's because the guy's on third, but Davis Schneider's not the quickest guy. You feel like they probably could throw him out still. I don't know. He just seems very intelligent. He gets on base a lot. He works good counts. Blake, what is the upside of Davis Schneider? Am I crazy to think that maybe he could make an all-star game or two? Is he going to settle in as kind of replacement level? What's your analysis tell you so far about the Babe?
Yeah, do you want to know the shithead answer of is he going to be an all-star? The worse a team you play on, the better chance you have of being the one. Every team has to get one, right? So, if Danny Jansen doesn't have enough games played, maybe he's going to sneak in there this year. I kid this year. Obviously, the Jays have pitching options, but yeah, that is your best way in sometimes. I don't know about all-star. We'll see, I guess. And you mentioned the fantasy ownership level, and I get that too, right? Like he's sitting under 250, and because the Blue Jays offense hasn't been very good, there aren't a lot of counting stats there. Like 3 stolen bases is nice, but with 5 home runs, 20 or fewer runs RBI, like it's not weirdly, he's one of those guys that is a much better actual baseball player than fantasy baseball player, which tends to be the opposite of the kind of guys we talk about in fantasy, right? Like I want that. I want Esteury Ruiz playing, who sucks as a baseball player, but is going to get me 50 steals if he plays enough games. Schneider's kind of the opposite of that. Now, in terms of actual baseball, I think there are a couple indicators that make me confident that Davis Schneider's, his ability to do damage on a baseball is pretty legitimate, and that he is a savvy enough hitter to figure out the challenges that come. And so, you look, and the strikeout rate's down a little bit this year. It's still high, but it's down a little bit from what we saw when he first came up last year. That was something he was able to do at AAA too. His when he repeated AAA for half a season, he really cut that strikeout rate down. Little bit of that was gaming the ABS system. You'll notice, go look at the AAA leaderboard sometimes in walk percentage, by the way, and look for the guys who are 5'9" or shorter. Rafael Lantigua at Buffalo Bisons right now. Stuart Broa with the Bisons right now. The short guys are gaming the top of the ABS system. But realistically, though, Schneider is 5'9", and that's going to, you could have the greatest bat speed in the world or a slow bat speed where you've got that nice short swing length. And either way, if you're 5'9", you're going to struggle with the stuff up in the zone. And he still has. He's gotten a little bit better at it. That's still there. He's always going to have some swing and miss to his game. But I mentioned earlier that damage rate stat from Robert Orr at Baseball Prospectus. He's in the 96th percentile for damage rate. So how often when you put the ball in play, is it a ball that should give you good results? He's in the 96th percentile. There's another stat on that same leaderboard that's called Seager, which is about your swing decisions. And it's, are you jumping on the pitches that you can really do damage on? So for Davis Schneider, the bottom 2/3 of the zone, are you jumping on those? Are you laying off the stuff high? Are you laying off chase stuff? And he's in the 97th percentile for that as well. So he's one of these rare guys that is, at least according to these metrics, hitting the ball hard enough with enough frequency and has the approach to sustain that because he's not swinging at garbage. He knows what he can do damage on. So yeah, there's going to be a challenge at some point where hitters find the next hole in his swing, or he has a cold streak against top end velocity in the higher part of the zone. Like, those are going to happen because he's not a 100% completely well-rounded hitter, but he has enough ability to punish a ball and a smart enough approach that I think he's like an everyday major leaguer. I don't have a lot of question about that. Like, now, is that a 125 WRC plus or 140 WRC plus? That might come down to, just how much he can turn doubles power into home run power over the years and things like that. But I think he's an everyday guy.
If he's a 125 WRC plus, sign me up. Absolutely, sign me up for that. Now,
what's he at right now? 130?
For this season, what is it? 130 for the season,
okay.
And 153 through his first 283 career plate appearances.
Right. Okay.
I'm optimistic here. Maybe I'm shooting for the moon a little bit too much.
Can you guys live with Schneider in left field? Because I like what I see from him at second base, but if he's like the left fielder when Varsho was in center, let's say they move on from Kiermaier at some point, what do you think of Schneider in left?
I don't love it. We saw that ball that was dribbled through the left side the other day, and he probably should have had the guy at home. I think most left fielders, I'm blanking on this exact situation, who it was rounding third. I think you guys probably know what I'm talking about. He probably should have had the guy at home. He threw the ball a little bit up the line. I feel like most left fielders make that, and it's not his fault because he's not really a left fielder. Toronto's done this. Barger plays his first game, and it's not in his natural position. Toronto does this kind of puzzling thing where they move guys around. I'd prefer to see him in the infield, is the short answer. Blake, do you like seeing him in left field?
Yeah, I think he's a better second baseman than left fielder. I think the Jays have some difficult decisions to make with how much they've, really embraced the defensive side of the ball. Yeah. That, look, one of the benefits of having a really good center fielder is supposed to be that you can have a lesser left fielder because that center fielder can cover more ground, or you could shift them over a little bit more. I like Springer's defense is pretty okay in right field still. Maybe you have a defensive setup where those two guys are shifted a little bit to help Davis Schneider on his side. But realistically, like, I watched Adam Lind play a lot of innings in left field. I watched Melky Cabrera play left field. I think Chris Colabello even went out there for a couple games. Like, I can deal with a little bit of bad left field if you can hit. And I think with the way the Jays are structured right now, that's a trade-off they have to make once or twice a week here. Like, I'll draw the line at Spencer Horwitz playing in left field. He's been getting reps at second base and left field as well to try to find a spot for him. That's maybe where I'd draw the line, because that apparently did not look very good when he was out there. But at a certain point, yeah, they've got to find a way to get offense, and that might mean making that trade-off there.
Part of the reason why we're struggling for offense and why Davis Schneider is at the top of the order is because George Springer has had a brutal season. He's actually increased his walk rate, his strikeout rate he's cut down on, but we're just seeing no power. We're seeing at this point a 66 WRC plus, a 561 OPS. Are we just into the decline phase at this point? Is it a slow start to the season where he'll eventually pick things back up, or should we recalibrate our expectations here to say that George is probably not going to do what we thought he was going to do again? Sho, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the age is where he's at, which makes me sad because I'm basically the same age as George Springer. It makes me feel like not great about what you're going to get from him going forward. It probably is just an age thing, although I got to say, while I knew when they signed this deal, the back end of the deal would look not great, because that's I feel like that happens a lot with a lot of sports, not just baseball, right? I mean, it's the same conversation a lot of people are having with like John Tavares and the Toronto Maple Leafs, for example, right? So I feel like when it comes to Springer's value, it was never going to be great. Having said that, I definitely had hoped that he would be at this point maybe a year from now and not now, because there's still quite a lot of money and term left in the deal. I mean, he in the last little while, and I know he didn't play yesterday, but in the last little while, he has been hitting a little bit better, specifically in the smallest of sample sizes since batting sixth, while Schneider is still in the lineup, because there was that weird period where he was sick and like half the team was sick. And I thought to myself, okay, well, David Schneider's batting leadoff, but George Springer is not available. And then, of course, as soon as Springer came back and he was healthy, he was batting leadoff. So now that we're in this era of seeing Schneider bat leadoff and Springer bat in the same game and bat fifth or sixth, wherever they decide to put him in that particular game, then I guess it's more acceptable, because when you're getting more ABs batting leadoff, you can't really afford to start off with one out essentially based on what he's been doing. But if he can keep this up, even if it's to a slightly lesser degree, I'm okay with it if he's batting sixth or seventh. Having said that, it's a lot of money to pay someone batting sixth or seventh, even if you are, like Blake said, still getting pretty good defense from the guy out and right.
It's weird to see as he's gotten older that he's stealing more bases. You would have thought that that'd be something that go by the wayside, but he stole 20 bases last year he had the first 2020 season of his career at age 33. Now he's already got 7 through 43 games. It's not what I would expect for a guy that you'd think would be trying to preserve his body. Blake, what do you make of George Springer at this point?
Yeah, it's tough. The stolen base is a good indicator of what I was going to say, which is that it's frustrating to see a guy, if you were going to take a player like Springer and try to figure out, okay, how could this guy age well? You look back to the peak years of his career and say, okay, in addition to the home run power, he drew a lot of walks. Let's build on that. As your power declines, let's focus on getting a few more walks, cut the strikeouts down so you can ball and play your way to a better average. And he has cut his chase rate down significantly. He has cut his whiff rate significantly. The walk rate is up. He's using his legs on the bases more. He is doing the things that you're supposed to do as you age to still have utility. And he's been okay in right field still. And it's just not there with the bat. I think this is one that he's probably the player that I'd be most interested if we had this bat speed data for a couple years back. And I can see in the back end on the MLB research tool last year's bat speed data, but I got told not to use it because it's not calibrated the same as this year and stuff. So we can't even compare there. I bet we'd see a pretty sharp decline. I know Tom Tango pulled all the data that we had with bat speed and showed the aging curve of bat speed, that there's an initial drop off. And then after 31, if you lose that bat speed, it's not coming back. And I think that's pretty related to the fact that Springer really struggled against fastballs last year. And we've seen a 3-4 year steady decline in his ability to pull the ball in the air. So pull the ball in the air isn't everything, obviously. Not everyone has to be Isaac Paredes, right? But Springer in 2021, more than a quarter of his balls in play were balls that were pulled in the air. That dropped to 16% last year. It's single digits this year. He's in the bottom 40 of the league in terms of how many balls in play are getting pulled in the air. That was also something where Bo doesn't do this nearly as much. He's not a pull guy, but he's down there with Bo and Kevin Kiermaier and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Ernie Clement and Alejandro Kirk. The Jays have a lot of those guys who have struggled to pull the ball in the air, but a lot of the guys that if you look at the leaderboards, he's in there with a lot of contact hitters, guys who are known to use the whole field and bat the ball guys. So that doesn't line up well to me with what looks visually like he can't catch up with fastballs and last year where he struggled against high end velocity. So I think the bat is probably not 194 batting average and sub 600 OPS bad, but like I think when George Springer comes back to who he is, like we're talking about like a 725 OPS guy, and even that might be a little on the high end.
So I think we're all in agreement here that he's probably not getting back to what he was. We need to find offense one way or another. Kirk has struggled. I mean, Varsho's been pretty good, but I think we can all agree that this team needs an offensive spark. Is it Aurelvis Martinez, who has been kind of struggling a little bit as of late? I don't know if it's going to be Joey Votto coming back and having a little bit of a magical run maybe that sparks things. But it feels like there's got to be some kind of shakeup coming here. Sho, do you think it'll be through a promotion, through a potential trade? I mean, hell, Brandon Belt, and there's a couple other free agents that are still sitting out there. Could it be a free agent? Is there something coming, you think? Does it feel like there's something in the works here that's going to jumpstart this team?
That would be nice, but I feel like it largely depends on how they do in these next little while. Because honestly, if they come back out to the Baltimore series at the beginning of June and they're a couple games that are over 500, they're probably at least not going to be sellers. I also don't know that they have the assets. And Blake, I know you do a lot more of the discussions with the minor league guys, but in terms of prospect analysis, but I'm not sure the Jays have the prospect capital to go out and even with an Aurelvis Martinez or Ricky Tiedemann, I'm not sure you want to be trading those guys based on the farm system, but let's say you wanted to trade them, would one or both of them be enough to get you a bat that is good enough to impact the future of this team? Like, would it be enough to get you and I'm going to aim super high. Like, could you get a Luis Robert Jr. from the White Sox, for example? I know he's injured, but if he was healthy, could you get someone like that? Or would it be enough to even get like a Ryan McMahon? Or I don't know if Nolan Arenado is still a sexy name anymore, right? But my point being is, can you use your prospect capital to buy other players in the same way we just saw? And it was odd that we saw this so early in the season, but Luis Arraez getting traded from the Marlins to the Padres, and that seems to have helped the Padres. Also, he may not be a power guy, but he's certainly a contact hitter and gets on base a lot. But I do wonder about that. I would like to see Aurelvis Martinez play at some point, but it's kind of tough, right? Because he obviously has the power, but positional logjam. He also makes a lot of errors. Like, his defensive work is not great. So do you really want to, for a team that prizes defense, we just talked about David Schneider in left field, for a team that prizes defense, if he's not going to play all the time, is it worth calling him up to the majors only to play like once every 3 days or something? Probably not, right? Especially because he's so young. So that's a conundrum for me, because as much as I would like to see him, because he clearly has some stupid power, I'm not sure it's the best move to bring him up to the majors right now.
I wonder with Ernie Clement recently, if he might be somebody with a couple of errors recently, the bat's not swinging very well. Could that be a natural switch, you think, maybe, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one just because I believe he's out of options. So you'd risk exposing him to waivers. And look, maybe he clears. Like, that's how you got him in the first place. Maybe he clears. But that's a guy, I think there's more to the bat than he's shown. The errors are weird because he's always had a rep as like a slick fielding guy. So that one's a little curious to me. I did think Vogelbach was getting pretty close to DFA territory. He had that big game Sunday, and I know he's like super well liked in the clubhouse. So maybe that saves him. But yeah, at some point they're going to have to look at those spots. And I think, I would think Spencer Horwitz is probably the next call instead of Aurelvis, not because Horwitz has the ceiling that Aurelvis has, but for the things that Sho mentioned. If you are going to have a guy come up who's only going to play 2-3 times a week, you'd probably rather that be the prospect who's almost 27 years old and has played, I think this is year 3 for him at AAA. Like, you're like Spencer Horwitz, you can always get better, but like, he's shown he's ready. There's not a lot that Spencer Horwitz is working on down in AAA that's going to change who he's going to be as a major league player. Whereas Aurelvis Martinez at 22, still figuring out second base and playing some third and stuff like that, they can better justify, I think, keeping him down there and being patient with him down there. He's also cooled off a little bit other than the power the last little while. So my guess would be Horwitz is the next guy in the door. That would have to be the Vogelbach spot, obviously, because if it were to be Ernie Clement and you do, roll the dice on exposing him to waivers, then you need someone with a little bit more positional versatility. So that's when you're talking about, whether it's Aurelvis or, Addison Barger, since Barger can play a third base there. My guess would be Vogelbach's more in trouble than Clement, though.
I think eventually it's going to have to come. I mean, from what we're hearing, like Kikuchi named his kid after Vogelbach, but the middle name is Daniel. Did I hear that one right? There was, I think, a City News or CTV.
Lindsay Dunn.
Yeah, that's who it was. That's who it was. And the kid's name is Daniel Kikuchi, or the middle name is Daniel, I think.
Middle name, yeah.
And then I think Bo Bichette's older brother played with Vogelbach or something. So there's a lot of connections there. I feel like, maybe Votto eventually takes that spot, or Horwitz or somebody, but it does feel like he's not long for this roster. But speaking of Yusei Kikuchi, I mean, this guy might be the best pitcher on the Blue Jays staff at this point. Just looking back over pretty much a whole calendar year now, going back to May 30th, which is when he kind of turned things around last season. He leads the team in ERA, xFIP, Sierra. He's second behind Kevin Gausman in strikeout minus walk rate, and it's 20.5% to 20.9%. Statistically speaking, he's probably been the best pitcher for the last year. Is it fair to say that, or am I being a prisoner of the moment here? What do you think, Sho?
You know what? I hesitate only because maybe it's because we give aces longer leashes, right? Like in the sense of, not ready to declare Gausman like not an ace, for example, but Kikuchi has been the most consistent, I would say. Maybe him and Barrios, they're maybe like 1 and 2 in terms of how consistent they have been, but boy, Kikuchi has been phenomenal. It is funny that we're having this conversation after the start against the White Sox, because he a little more erratic, a teensy bit, but still he's been very, very good. Not a lot of walks, and that was kind of the issue, I guess, 2 years ago. He was walking a lot of guys. Strikeouts were way up, but I think there was also some. I remember Blake having this conversation with Joe Siddall. Joe, of course, a former catcher, and I remember Joe Blake saying something along the lines of like, when he's refusing to throw the fastball, you like grab him by the scruff of his neck and make him throw the fastball, basically. And you know what? He's been a lot. The pitch mix for Kikuchi this year has been a lot more palatable, and certainly last year as well. He was phenomenal, but the fastball slider combo. But he's throwing the changeup. He has the curveball. And both of those pitches, he just seems a little more balanced. And maybe there was some working out with the pitch clock, or maybe it was a mental thing a couple of years ago. I'm not sure. But it is nice to see Kikuchi find a more reliable, steady form. And even if he's not king the side every single time, he is able to locate. Because I think that was what I was most worried about. Would he be able to locate again? And he had kind of an uneven spring, but hey, so far so good this year.
We've gotten to a point where fantasy, real life, it doesn't matter maybe if it was the Braves or Dodgers, I'd be a little worried, but pretty much every team out there, Kikuchi is an auto start for me from a fantasy point of view. And I don't really feel that nervous at all in any Kikuchi starts, which is a very weird feeling being in Toronto and seeing what we've seen the last couple of years, but he's completely reinvented himself. Blake, is it crazy to say he might be the best pitcher on the staff at this point?
I don't think that's crazy at all. I mean, in terms of the quality of the stuff we've seen so far this season, I don't think there's really a question. Like with Kevin Gausman's splitter being a little lesser this year, and Barrios and Bassett being more the like, hey, we're smart pitchers and we're going to mix and match you. Like I think on a stuff basis, Kikuchi's been the best guy there. And you mentioned, who would or wouldn't you start him against? We just saw that Baltimore game. Yeah, he only went 4 1/3. But that Baltimore team is the number 1 offense in baseball hitting against left-handed pitching. And he struck out 9 guys in those 4 1/3 innings and only gave up 1 earned run. So, that would be the test, right? Like, is that team maybe the Diamondbacks as far as teams that really mash lefties? So he passed that test. I know the strikeouts are down a little bit. I'm never going to argue with a guy having a career low walk rate and a career low home run rate. The walk rate to me, and similar to what Sho was saying and referencing Joe Siddall, is like there does seem to be a trust in your stuff. And if I was a lefty who had great extension down the mound and threw 96, 97, I would probably trust my stuff too. It's good stuff to trust. There's, I guess, the like one minor concern you'd have is that his swing and miss rate, his whiff rate is like league average this year. And historically he's missed more bats, but I think that's in the service of being around the zone more and walking fewer guys. And look, even if the home run rate comes up because he makes the odd mistake here and there living in the zone, solo home run doesn't hurt you all that much. So I'm here for it, man. I think, a big picture, if I were to guess who would be the best pitcher from here for the Blue Jays, I don't know that I'd pick Kikuchi necessarily because Barrios and Gausman have such a track record. But so far this year, I think he's had the best stuff on the team. He's been their nastiest guy.
If you go to Fangraphs and you look at the Stuff Plus from our mutual friend Eno Saris, the number one Stuff Plus for any Blue Jays starter this year is Yusei Kikuchi. It's not even really close. 109.
Nice.
Next best is Yariel Rodriguez at 100, and then everybody else is below 100, and he's above 100, which is average in location plus, pitching plus. And he was doing that last year too. Like, I think that this is a real turnaround, and we got to credit him, and we also got to credit the pitching coach Pete Walker. They've just done phenomenal work there.
I need a Stuff Plus T-shirt. That's what I need. I need that look on a T-shirt of some kind. That's my favorite stat. It's so great.
There's got to be something.
The one thing I don't love about it, though, and yeah, the Athletics got to get Eno's got to independently release some gear or whatever. The only thing that I don't like about it is when I'm like, I was just talking about Kikuchi's stuff, and I didn't mean Stuff Plus. I just meant like the quality of his stuff. And now I get worried sometimes. I'm like, is someone going to think I'm referencing Stuff Plus? No, Stuff Regular, unadjusted stuff is what we're going to have to start specifying.
No, I think I know what you mean. I think that's probably why Eno went that route with it, because that's kind of like one of those terms like, oh, he's got great stuff. And then it definitely works. We spoke a lot about Gausman. Tough start to the season. I've been trying to blame it on, well, he didn't have spring training and he had the shoulder fatigue and et cetera, but we're a couple months in at this point. I don't know how much longer I can really milk that one. It has been a tough go of things. Do you expect that he's going to return to form, which over the last 4 seasons, if you look leaderboards from 2020 through 2023, you could make an argument Kevin Gausman was the best starting pitcher in baseball, or at least the top 3 starting pitcher. Sho, can we see him get back to that? The strikeouts are really down. We haven't seen quite the same velocity, but is this something that's coming, you think?
You know what? He might not get back to the point where he was last year, where he was like setting Blue Jays records for most strikeouts in a season or somewhere near it, right? Like it might not be that point this year, but I do think that we are, it's early enough based on his really weird spring. And yeah, it's true. Like the splitter, there are times where it doesn't have as much bite, or he's leaving it over the middle of the plate a little bit more. He's not burying it as much. The fastball velo has been interesting to look to. I mean, his fastball has always been, I think, like pretty good, maybe above average, but so far the velo generally has been down. Sometimes I feel like you see it tick back up when he knows he is, about to get out of an inning where there's 2 outs and 2 strikes in the last batter, or he knows his outing is about to be done, and I feel like you see it tick back up a little bit, but generally it's fluctuated, and I know pitchers can play with that, certainly, and he's been able to, but it's interesting to see a guy, because I remember in last couple of years, we've kind of talked about kind of the same lines of Kikuchi, who largely has used his fastball and slider prior to this year. With Gausman, his fastball and splitter, you kind of think to yourself, well, sometimes maybe he needed to develop a non-splitter off-speed pitches like the slider, for example, and he's been able to. But if I find in the last couple of starts that he's actually been he's been a little heavier on the fastball splitter mix. He's been able to get by with some of the other pitches when he's run into trouble with the splitter. But I mean, maybe it just feels like he's grinding through more starts than we've ever really seen him. And again, I wonder if, again, we're towards the end of 2 months of the season. I'm willing to give it until the All-Star break before I'm willing to say, okay, he's not going to be an ace this year. He's not going to pitch like it. But we've seen enough glimpses that I do think it'll happen. It just probably is a longer runway for him.
I think it's coming to, like, if you look at those first couple of starts where he really inflated his ratio. So there was that start at Yankee Stadium where he was throwing 85-mile-an-hour fastballs in the cold, and I think all of Toronto was collectively holding their breath. And then he had the real ugly one against Colorado. Other than that, it's been pretty solid. 0 or 1 earned run in most starts, 7 quality innings against the Dodgers. Blake, what do you think here with Kevin Gausman? From a real-life perspective, fantasy point of view, is he somebody we can expect to be that ace that Toronto expects and that you expect if you drafted him for fantasy this season?
Yeah, the other thing, too, is we're talking about this shortly after a Twins start, and we know what the Twins do to Kevin Gausman. Sure. Whatever they have on him, they have it on him in a big, serious way. So maybe you get back to, Kevin Gausman's a fantasy ace for you, but you don't start him against the Twins, just in case. So there are 2 main things I'm looking at with Gausman, other than, the introduction of this 2-seam fastball, which is interesting, but I think it's mostly just to kind of keep right-handed hitters off the 4-seamer as a show me thing. So 2 things. The first is that I I'm more worried about the fastball location than the velocity being down a tick. Historically, and we don't have a great sample because there aren't that many splitter guys, but splitter pitchers are supposed to age okay because the fastball and the splitter will lose velocity together. And we've seen that this year. The splitter and the fastball are both, the velocity on both is down almost equally. And so as long as those pitches tunnel well together still, and it's hard to pick them up well still, the change in velocity, they're like the velocity separation is still the same. Similar to like how a changeup guy like Marco Estrada can age well because the changeup declines as the fastball does, and you still get the same level of interplay between them. So, but the fastball location, he's throwing the fastball lower in the zone this year than we've seen in years. And some of that could be, you're just not getting the ride on your fastball that you want. But some of this could be like a cat and mouse thing where we've seen teams like the Twins and like the Yankees lay off anything low. And that's because if it's coming in low, the splitter's going to dip out of the zone. And Gausman has historically gone fastball high, splitter low. Maybe too many teams were sitting off the splitter low, and he's had to pepper the fastball in the bottom part of the zone to steal strikes. Like, hey, if you're going to lay off anything low, I'm going to sneak a fastball in there at the lower edge, get a 0-1 count here to work with. The trade-off there is that it's an easier fastball to hit, and the slugging numbers against the fastball are pretty bad. So 635 slugging against his fastball this year. So that's something that maybe he could correct. Maybe he could go back to throwing the fastball a little higher. So that's the one thing. The second thing, and I'm not the best person to talk about this because in terms of like the mechanics of like seam shifted wake and all that stuff, Mikey Ahedo of Baseball Prospectus had a good piece on Gausman today that went up, and he kind of was like, well, yeah, the splitters doesn't have as much depth as it usually does. So that would be a thing. I've got to dig in a little bit more on, what that means. Maybe talk to Gausman about why he's not getting as much depth on the splitter. But that's kind of, and it wasn't like a huge change. It's not like the splitter's not moving or not dropping at all. But it is notable that the splitter hasn't been quite as effective in addition to him having to change that fastball location a little bit.
If you look at the pitch values on Fangraphs, all of his pitches have negative value this year. That splitter has been a positive value pitch for him going back to the Baltimore days. He hasn't had a negative value on it since 2015. The fastball generally is about the same. Like the last year was really not great, was pre-COVID. But, I do have confidence that Gausman will figure things out. I don't know how much emphasis I want to put into that shoulder fatigue that happened at the beginning of the spring, if that's something we need to worry about going forward at all. You don't love to hear it. Before he's even really thrown a pitch this year, that he's got shoulder fatigue, but I think he is starting to come out of it. Like you said, the Twins have his number, but other than that, I do think that Gausman will probably be okay. The thing that does worry me, maybe not more than anything, because there's a lot of worries on this team, but Jordan Romano doesn't seem to be as sharp as he has been in the past. And I don't know if it's because of the back injury or the fact that closers just don't have a terribly long shelf life. But he's got a 4.91 ERA through his 12 appearances. We've seen Yimi Garcia really do excellent things. Could Toronto, and now this is just kind of popping up in my head right now, could Toronto potentially put Yimi Garcia in the closer role to showcase him ahead of a potential July trade? Is that something that is possible, especially if Romano keeps struggling? Sho, is that a crazy thought, or what do you think there about Romano potentially losing his job at some point this season?
It always has seemed to me that they've been really reluctant to remove Romano wholesale from that spot. I'm sure at least in the back of someone's mind, they also have the light show that goes on whenever he enters the ballgame. It'd be kind of weird for it to play when he's like not coming in for a save. But
in the sixth inning,
it'd be kind of strange. But I do wonder. I don't think it's out of line to say they might showcase Yimi Garcia more, but I do wonder if it just will end up being more of a tandem thing, right? Like you don't want to see Jordan Romano coming out to say, and the Blue Jays play a lot of close games. You don't want to see him coming out in the ninth inning for like 3 straight days, for example, which they have done. It's just, do you really want to overwork your closer? Probably not. I know he makes it a little bit of an adventure. This is true. I think that, it can be a little dicey sometimes. Sometimes I'm convinced he almost needs to have a runner on when there's a 1 or 2 run game just to like feel alive sometimes. But at the same time, Jordan Romano has still been one of the more reliable closers probably in all of baseball. Like he's probably is he like Emmanuel Clase or Camilo Doval, for example? Like probably not, but he's if you're ranking closers and he's like the 7th to 10th best closer in baseball, and he might actually be higher than that. I'm just saying, spitballing here, but I think I feel okay with it to not take him out of the closer role. Having said that, if you do get to a point where it's another close game, while you do need guys not named Jimmy Garcia and Jordan Romano to get outs for this bullpen, if it's a close game and he's pitched a lot or he had a lengthy outing, I wouldn't mind seeing Jimmy Garcia come in to close a game, but more in a kind of a tandem thing, a la Jordan Hicks getting some chances last year versus Jordan Hicks coming in completely supplanting Romano, for example, in 23.
Blake, what do you think? Are you concerned about Romano here with the back, with the performances? Is there a chance that he potentially loses that role in your mind?
I think things would have to go bad for a while for him to lose that job. Like, if you look back to the start of the 2021 season, and I know relievers change quickly, but bear with me here. Among the, what are we looking at here? The top 50 pitchers in saves over the last 4 years. The only person who has a higher conversion percentage is Josh Hader. Like, that's it. And like, I'm not saying the stuff's not as good as Yohan Duran. I don't trust him as much as Emmanuel Clase. But when it comes to just like, have you done the job as a closer, going 102 for 114 in save situations, Josh Hader's the only guy who's converted more. And this is top 50. Like, we're talking about guys with only 20 saves. And he's still beat that with 102 saves. So yes, the stuff hasn't been as good. He is. I don't feel as confident in him. Certainly fastball location, the ability to generate whiffs on the slider is still there, but it hasn't felt quite as effective. I think they'll have a lot of patience with him. I think the other element of this too is like Jimmy Garcia. I don't think he'd blow a save, but like, why his value's high. I don't know that his value is going to get much higher by like getting him 2-3 saves. I think right now you could be like, look, he's like top 10 in win probability added. He's our fireman. This is the other thing too. Even if you're not talking about trade, if you're just talking about like, hey, you want to use Jimmy Garcia in higher leverage spots, sometimes managing to the save handcuffs you a little bit, right? If you have a closer like Jimmy Garcia coming in with runners on second and third for the top of the Orioles order in the 6th inning the other week, that's how I want to use Jimmy Garcia. I don't necessarily want to save him for the 9th inning anyway. So I'm fine with the current setup. I just think, this team will look at Romano's track record and give him a lot of leeway there.
Do you guys think that Romano gets like too slider happy sometimes? I find that's whenever we see like knowing that he can throw a filthy fastball. I wonder what goes behind and we don't know without actually asking him. We're asking the catcher or asking Pete Walker, but I sometimes wonder if he throws it too many times. Like I feel like sometimes you see him come out there, Blake, and you'll see him throw like 5 sliders in a row just until he can't anymore, essentially.
Yeah, he's like a 50-50 guy, right? And I think some of it is probably which pitch feels best that day. And some of it is like you got to keep guys guessing when you only have 2 pitches, and they might not think you're going to throw 4 in a row. His fastball also has not had good results this year. So I could see it being, him just trusting the slider a little more than the fastball right now. I think probably you'd like that to be like a tight 50-50, like it doesn't get to 55-45 slider. But I don't have a ton of, like, this is who he is. It's who he's been. 2021, I think he was more like 60-40 fastball slider. But for the last 3 years, this is who he is. And the slider, probably the one encouraging thing in his season so far is that the slider still has a 40% swing and miss rate. So, not, again, he hasn't been, there's no question that he hasn't been effective yet, not the level of effectiveness he normally is, but I think the Jays would probably be fine with where he's at.
It's a bit of an issue, the pen, like we mentioned, that we can't, I think, Sho, you said it can't just be Romano and Garcia. The rest of that pen is pretty shaky. I thought Nate Pearson was kind of figuring it out this year, but I mean, I didn't put this on the outline, but I'm just curious. Do you guys think Nate Pearson is, I don't even want to say it, but is Nate Pearson a bust? He said very quietly, like, is it fair to say that at this point?
I mean, he's a bust relative to being a first-round pick. I know late first-round picks don't hit a ton in baseball generally, so bust maybe isn't a fair word, but, like, the fact that he didn't stick as a starter, the fact that he, like, I don't know, I was joking on my show today with Keegan Matheson that, like, yeah, if you let go of Nate Pearson at some point, he's gonna have a Jeff Hoffman season where, like, at age 30, he figured out how to be the best setup man in baseball. And it just, like, the stuff is just that good. But, like, this is his 4th year in the majors, like, getting a little bit of time, at least in the majors. It's not like they haven't given him a good amount of opportunity here, even when healthy. So I don't know. Bust is maybe a little harsh just because of how often first-round picks actually deliver. But yeah, I would have thought at this point he should be a pretty reliable bullpen guy by this point. He's almost 28.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. I mean, you might have thought a couple of years ago before this Mason Miller thing that maybe that's a role that he could turn into, this incredible type of closer. That was my hope once we kind of realized he wasn't going to be a starting pitcher anymore. But guys, we've covered the team in a lot of depth here, and I really appreciate both of you taking the time. I know you got very busy schedules, but it's awesome to talk with both of you. I do want to give you a chance just to let everybody know like where you can be found, what it is you got going on, because I know you're very busy people. Blake, let's start with you. Tell everybody where you can be found and everything that's going on.
Before I do that, I have a quick question for you, Joe, since you mentioned Mason Miller. Do you know what his FIP is right now?
Negative something.
Negative? Yeah.
It is negative. A negative FIP. The formula doesn't work, guys, if we're saying he's like, this is the only way for Blue Jays starting pitchers to get a win sometimes would be to figure out how to have a negative ERA in addition to the negative FIP. But yeah, negative 0.16. Anyway, yeah, so Jays Talk Plus is my Jays show. It's 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. every day on Fan 590 and Sportsnet 360. And in the Jays Talk podcast feed, me and Sho kind of get the tag team the same podcast feed, which is cool. And then, yeah, pop up on Blue Jay Central from time to time. But the schedule is too irregular for me to promote it.
It's awesome, man. You do great work over there. I know I'm listening or watching to you pretty much every single day. And the same with you, Sho. It's great to have you back. Well, different show, but essentially I'm still having you back on. Great to talk with you again, man. Let everybody know what's going on in your world.
Yeah, well, yeah. First of all, great to be chatting with you, Joe. You'll have to join me on one of the pregame shows again, like we did last year.
Absolutely.
I can be, like Blake said, I can be found on the Jays Talk podcast feed, and when baseball, even sometimes when baseball is happening, I can be found on Sportsnet Tonight's, just talking whatever. Maybe we'll talk some WNBA coming to Toronto. Maybe we'll talk the PWHL. Maybe we'll talk the Raptors not having their own first round pick this year. Who knows? We do all sorts of stuff, Blake.
Lots of depressing topics in Toronto sports media, but these two have you covered. They're doing excellent work. Blake, you can find over on Twitter at Blake Murphy ODC, and Sho at SNS Alli ALLI. Guys, we'll be back again tomorrow to wrap up the week. But until then, everybody take care and have a great night.